Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another 50 Acres Academy webinar. Today's webinar on how to be super efficient and maximise your time on social media is on today. That's the subject of today's webinar. This slightly freaky photo of the rabbit is not me. One of my team this morning told me that it looked a bit weird, but I just thought it was a good photo, so I hope it's not freaking any of you out and you're having a good Tuesday. So we'll go through a number of things today, and what we're going to cover is, first of all, working out who you are, why you're doing it in the first place, really, and how best to do it in terms of social media, because you need to sort of think about all of that before you get started, to be honest. How much time is it really taking? How, let's just examine the inefficiencies. It's amazing when you look at the stats, which we'll include a few of those just to amaze you. How to be more efficient on social media. And then we'll go through a whole lot of tools with that. How to spend your time on social media in a typical day. You've probably seen lots of stuff come through your inbox, how to do social media, how to get it all done in 6 minutes and grow your follower base to that rivaling Lady Gaga. I don't think I've got the exact answers, but I'll give you a sort of a reasonably good assessment of what I think you should be able to do in under an hour a day, or less probably, depending on how many platforms you're on. Then we'll drill down and have a look at the platforms and tools themselves, and there's some really good ones out there, and I'm sure a lot of you are using them already. We will talk about those in some detail. And then please don't hesitate to, ask any questions at any time. That's the key to today, and put your questions into the question box. And we will get to those. And sorry, David, if you were wondering where we were. I'm hoping that David, that you messaged me before. I'm hoping that you're able to hear. So just to kick off, let's have a think about, the first question I think that we need to address before we do anything else, which is, why are you doing it in the first place? Everyone sort of says you've got to do it, you've got to be there. I suppose the question for me is really examining, why that is. What are you doing it for? What's your raison d'etre? And, trying to isolate that first before you do anything else, before you grab hold of all of these platforms, before you start doing a whole lot of stuff. So let's have a think about that. I think essentially, you need to think about how you're interacting, what you're doing. If you're on Facebook, Instagram, and Google or any of the social sites that are out there, it's really important to create, I think, an online identity for yourself. Your brand is really what differentiates you from others that are on the sites that are out there trying to achieve whatever you're doing. It may be that you're just interacting. It may be that you've got a really strong objective. It's a campaign, or it's a profile raising for yourself or for your organisation. You could have some big lofty goals. It might just be that you're really having a bit of fun and seeing, gathering information from being on social media. It's really up to you. But I think you need to identify what that brand is before you start doing what you're doing. The voice, needs to match. Just excuse me. Everyone, that was a cough at an inopportune moment. My apologies, I've got a bit of a cold. The voice needs to match your business or your organisation's overall theme. Obviously, your voice really sets a tone, I think, that helps others instantly recognize who you are, what your posts are, and then relate to you and your posts. Sorry, I'm just having a sip of hot tea. That hopefully will help. The personality, that you have needs to appear not just in your posts, but in everything that you're doing. So when you're talking to someone, whether you're just responding, whether you're saying thanks, whatever you're doing, because people will see through, if you're, always very formal all you've got is sort of formal announcements, and then all of a sudden you jump on and you start interacting and you're very casual. So you need to have a think about how that voice appears. If you've got the energy and enthusiasm that's displayed in terms of your posts, let your persona really shine through, and people will see that. They will identify with that, and they'll respond to it very positively. So I think you need to think about what you're trying to achieve. What's the purpose of being there in the first place? You're understanding, what you're trying to do. We mentioned it a moment ago. What are you trying to achieve? Is it gaining followers? Is it building relationships? Is it just really networking, information gathering, really just doing it because everyone else is doing it? That's fine as well. We often sit in front of the television for no particular reason. We can also be on social media for no particular reason, although, we'll exactly identify how much time it's wasting in a moment. Is it to establish your own thought leadership? Is it to establish the thought leadership of your organisation? You need to have a think about what all of that means before you really sort of jump in. Or if you're well and truly jumped in and you're up to your neck in it, perhaps pause for thought and think, what am I really doing here? Am I just, this sort of, rudderless, or, I could do better at what I'm doing. Have a think about that, maybe pause and revisit. Are you trying to drive traffic to your site, to your networks, or are you trying to get leads, donations, engagement? There's a whole lot of possible agendas, obviously. So I think the other thing to do before you go too far down the track, or if you're revisiting what you're actually doing, a really useful feature of social media is the ability to communicate with almost anyone. I often say to people, and I'm not that old, I can remember the days when there was no social media. Social media was talking to the person in the next desk, perhaps talking to someone on the phone. It was hard to call up and talk to an MP. It was impossible to talk to, a senior person in business or another opinion former in your space. Now it's reasonably easy, and in some senses there's an imperative from some of these people, or certainly their organisations, or you could call their minions below them if they're really important, to respond before it gets out of hand, because obviously an MP or a opinion former doesn't want a whole lot of stuff going on unanswered. So, if that's the case, there's often, and I often talk about this with MPs, that, there is almost an expectation that we can, vote them in and out of the Big Brother house. It's like social media. It's like the spelling bee or whatever it is, or MasterChef. We can press the buzzer and out they go. And I think there's a sense from them that if we're asking questions where even rude or cranky, there's an imperative from them to respond back to us. We may not necessarily get the answer that we're wanting. We may not even get a meaningful answer, but generally we're getting responses. So that really has changed the face of how we communicate. We can now send, them, all of these people, public messages. We can share their content. We can interact with them through a whole lot of various platforms, and we make contacts through social media. I use all sorts of platforms to engage with people, both professionally and in terms of building my business, all sorts of platforms, and I'll go through those a little bit later. But, we all do different things, but it's extraordinary what we can do. So, interaction is good, I think, if it's done with a purpose. So, the problem is that most people, just follow the various influencers and randomly interact with them. We've all got the sort of key people that we think we need to have on our feed, but actually, do we have any meaningful engagement in any of the people that we're following or listening to, or who are listening to us? And perhaps think about that before you go too much further down the line, or pause to think about that before you perhaps revisit this stuff. So, what's really interesting is, how much time it is taking. That's the scary thing, I think, and that's something that we're just going to look at now. So, here are the facts, and this is the scary thing. An Ipsos poll. We've all heard of Ipsos polls. There was one about the federal government a few days ago. I think it was a global poll or global study, found that on average we're spending 3.5 or 3.6 hours on social media each day, which is quite extraordinary. Depending on what you do, if you're a surgeon, you probably shouldn't be spending that much time on social media. You're probably not, but that's about 25% of our waking time, or about 16 minutes an hour, roughly. I'm not a mathematician, but it sort of amounts to about that. Under 35-year-olds of you on the line are spending more than the average person at 4.2. Some of you would probably spend more than that. 35 to 49-year-olds are spending 3.1. And age 50 and over are spending 2.8, which is, again, pretty amazing. So I would imagine that average is coming, obviously from amongst all of that. So when we look at it, there's obviously a whole bunch of reasons why there's a whole lot of inefficiencies there, and that's some of the things we need to think about today. If we are spending 25% of our waking time on social media, is there justification for it? Is there anything else that we can do? I spoke a couple of weeks ago at an event about the future of work with the ANU Vice Chancellor, and one of the things we were looking at is the whole evolution of work. And I did some research before I gave my contribution, and I was listening to a TED talk by a guy who's the CEO of Basecamp, which you may know. It's a online platform, a global platform, project management platform. And one of the things he was saying is that not only offices, as in being in an office, he's a great advocate for flexible working, being able to work, when, where and how you want. His argument was, things like social media and actually being in meetings and being constrained to being at a desk from 9 to 5 were in themselves constraints on us doing good work. We all want to do good work, but we're constrained by the fact that we have all these other things around us that we have to do. So we have to attend meetings that we may not necessarily need to be in, that then give us other tasks. But we also are now almost a slave to social media, and I think that's one of the things that has happened, and it's happened almost without us knowing and without us really having been party to that decision. I certainly didn't realise when I first got my first LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever account a few years ago, that it would become quite all-consuming, and to some extent we are still crash test dummies, I think. Where certainly, in that early stages, there was, there's some great historical information about how the first printing presses were received, and people thought they were heretic and that they weren't, they weren't going to last, they weren't going to be, a long-term thing. I think we're in that stage with social media, companies, particularly the print media, and media generally haven't worked out a way of monetizing it particularly well. But there's a lot of other people out there who are monetizing it very well. So, it's interesting. I think we are, obviously moving to a point where, most people are somehow touching it, but there's still a lot of people who are skeptical and still a lot of people who aren't embracing it. So I suppose it's just about having a think about how much time you are spending and what time that is. But we'll move on to the effectivity, the being effective just now. Now, I've just got a question here from David, who says, should a business focus on a single platform or app, or try to spread itself across several different forms of social media. David, I'm just about to talk about that right now, so we'll get to that just in a tick. So essentially, it really does boil down to, I think, before we get on to all the different tools, and there is thousands of them now. I mean, if you look at the App Store or wherever you buy your apps from, depending what type of phone you're on, there is apps every day, and you would go mad if you wanted to try and use them all. So it's about trying to think about what we're going to do that's effective. But before we get there, let's think about how you actually can work. One of the things that I think, and I'm not always, I am not perfect, I can tell you that, but it's about thinking about how you can streamline your time and use it more effectively. Working in batches to improve efficiency, I think, is a really good way of doing that. There's a lot of stuff, journaling and diaries. There's a whole resurgence of, going back to the Filofax, or, these sort of handwritten diaries, and trying to plan our time more effectively rather than being slaves to all of these online things that are sort of pushing stuff, these push notifications and stuff that's pushing them the way through our sort of daily consciousness. I think batch thinking or batch efficiencies would go some part to do that. I think, thinking in a batch, spending some time to actually think coherently. It's a bit like what the Basecamp guy was talking about. How many times a week do you actually sit down and do creative work, quality time, where you're spending an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours uninterrupted, to do quality work, whatever that is that you do, whether it's writing, whether it's thinking, whether it's, whatever it is, drawing, painting, whatever it is that you do. How much time do you ever do that? And, I think it's about, try and allocate that time, schedule that time in. If it's an electronic scheduler, that's great. If it's a written diary that I've gone back to just recently, do that, but schedule that time in. As a company, what we've found that works for us is actually getting someone who's almost dedicated to doing social media, who is really, I suppose, our batch person. We all have involvement in it, but she's sitting there dedicated to, she's coming up with a whole lot of stuff, and it really works well. So she's getting all that thinking time to just go off and think about social media, and it's working really well, because we don't just communicate on various platforms, but we're also using, writing blog posts for a number of different sites. So, for us, it's a resource that we need to dedicate. The thing about time management and working in batching, if you spread yourself thin and you switch between tasks, yourself what social media has done to you. And I know only too well, we can see it, I can see it in my kids. You switch, between tasks, you lose your focus. So when you've only got one main task to do, in a larger batch, it's less intimidating and it's more effective. And hopefully you can, shut down all those other distractions and get on with it. Concentrating your effort and scheduling your social media time, makes it harder to miss things, I think. And it allows you to, schedule ahead, at least plan to schedule ahead, so that you've got stuff, up your sleeve, if you like. And you're not really caught on the hop thinking, I've got to do something today, what is it? But if, yes, you can do something that's spontaneous, of course, but if you've come up with a bunch of ideas, you've got a library of thoughts and posts that you can draw on, it really does make the sort of week a lot better. So let's have a think about how we can streamline our time. I think, as I've just mentioned, batching is, how do you make that work? Well, you come up with a whole lot of post ideas all at once. Yes, you're not going to be able to think, what you're going to need in 6 months' time, but there is, depending on what space you're in, there's a whole lot of stuff that you can draw on. Sometimes your own creativity, you'll just come up with your own fresh content. Sometimes you'll rebadge stuff or repost stuff, or, use stuff for inspiration. It's really, drawing on a whole lot of stuff that's coming from different areas. Your goal should be to have a really large reservoir of social media posts that you can draw on as you need. And use your time effectively. You need to come up with different ideas for different social networks. You might have one idea that's great, and it might work across all your networks. It may need to be rewritten. We tend to try and write, and I'll explain this in a second, but if we're using Buffer, for example, one of the social management tools, we'll tend to write something that will work on Twitter, but then also will flow through to Facebook, and always try and attach a picture, unless it's just a little tip, which we also use. So driving efficiency by scheduling. I think one of the things I just mentioned before is, scheduling posts on a regular basis, I think is really important. One of the biggest ways that people waste time on social media, and goes to your question, David, is logging into each network and posting an update one at a time. That's something that you don't need to do, and we'll explain why that is in a second. There's a lot of tools that you can use. You can save a lot of time by designating one time at the start of the week or month to schedule multiple posts. And I'll explain that in a second in some detail. But, of course, if an issue comes up or something new comes up that you've got to talk about, of course you can raise that. It makes complete sense. But, you can make adjustments and add stuff. But, you should plan to share each of those posts or blog posts at least once on all your networks in some form. So obviously, you can't just put a blog post on Twitter, but you can, link to the blog post on your website. You can link to the blog post with a longer, bit of an explanation. So there's different ways of using that content, but making sure that you're repurposing it so that you don't go into each network separately, which is one of the biggest, consumptions of time. So, how do we get it under control? I mean, I can remember when I first went on to Twitter before I really knew what it was. I don't know, maybe some of you remember this. I thought, oh my God, I have to read all these tweets that are coming through. I have to read them all, And so you sort of, manically trying to get all this stuff because you followed all these people. You thought it really interesting, really cool. And you just thought, oh, right, you have to, go through them all because you'll miss something. Well, I just don't think like that anymore. And there's a whole lot of stuff out there. But, if you're worried about what you were missing, you'd never sleep and you'd go mad. So you can't think like that. You can only just, I suppose, put in some structures around you to try and capture the information that you think you need. And there's so much of it, you're not going to be able to get it all. So let's get it under control so that we don't go mad. So, you don't need. How do you deal with the traffic? I think is one of the things that I think people don't know how to deal with. So, you don't need to, depending on the level of interaction that you have with your followers or with the people that you're following, you don't need to email back or talk to every single person who either retweets or responds or thanks you for doing something. If you did, depending on the level of interaction, you'd probably go a bit mad. The easiest way to stay connected but not overwhelmed, I think, is to only respond to conversations where someone specifically asks you something. They ask for further information. They ask for guidance. If they simply just post a thank you, you can let it go, I think, unless you hardly ever get any interaction at all and then go for your life. But, one way is just dealing with, you can imagine if you're walking down the road, if you sort of said hello to every single person that you're passing who, vaguely looked happy, then that's all you'd be doing all day and someone would arrest you because you looked mad. I think another effective way to stay on task with social networking is to set up a response system. 1 or 2 days a week, you can set aside 15 or 20 minutes to respond to your social networking emails and posts. Now, a lot of people have some of this stuff coming into their inbox as a reminder. So if you can have alerts, that notifications pretty much on every network, it can tell you when you're getting anything on anywhere, and you could have thousands of them coming in if you really are a very engaged person. I don't have any of those notifications coming into my inbox. By and large, I use the social media management tools to do that for me. It'll tell me those things. The only ones that I do alert myself to is LinkedIn if I have a specific, response to an email I've sent or a request to connect. But everything else I manage through my social media management tools, which I'll talk to in a moment. If you have emails from all the sites that you're on coming into your personal or business email address, you can set up a file and you can sweep them automatically in. to your follow-up folder. And then you can check on the folder on the days that you choose to respond. So, going through them, one at a time, and then send a quick response if you think it needs to, and then you move on so that you're not sort of lingering on it and, letting it sort of sit there. Sorry, then, if the contact is someone who you want to do business with or to stay in touch with, then add that person to a key contacts file. I think that's that's a file that you set up in your email or even in your database to keep your important contacts stored and active so that you don't lose them. You can have a whole bunch of people that you're interacting with on social media, but are you contacting them in any other way? Are they real people, or are they just avatars floating past you in the night? And if, you want to personalize them, make them real, you can take it offline. You can send them a direct message. You can talk to them, my golly gosh. And partly that's one of the reasons why we are interacting. We're trying to meet people and do business with them, proselytize to them about something we're doing, convince them to sign up to our cause, whatever it is we're doing. If we don't talk to them as human beings, we just see them as these avatars floating past us, then, there's almost no point. Alison suggests us just asked, are we going to get the slides or handouts? We will email you the slides at the end of today, and there's also going to be a recording up on our 50 Acres TV YouTube channel as well. So if you search 50 Acres TV on YouTube, then you'll find this recording up there as well. But you'll all get the slides. So, I think the thing about it is using the right platforms in the first place. I think some people, businesses, feel that they, need to have active assets on every single social media platform. And we've all seen websites where at the bottom of the page there's 14 or 15 different platforms. We're on Pinterest, we're on, Vibe, we're on, everything, Instagram, we're on Tumblr, we're on, whatever else, and it just goes on and on and on. And really, how many people are on all those actively? Perhaps, a 16-year-old who doesn't do much else other than, hang out and do stuff, and hopefully they're doing something else with their lives. But, I don't think there's many people who are doing all those networks really well at the same time. So I think it's about thinking about why you need to be on them and what you are using them for. And let's have a think about that. So, you can be more productive, I think, by focusing on the media platforms that are most likely to reach your target audience. So, there's new platforms every day. There's one called Beam, BEME, by a guy called Casey Neistat, who is this sort of vlogger over in New York, and he's just created this app where you have the camera up to your chest, touching it to your body triggers it to work. The idea is you don't put the camera in front of your face and stop you communicating with the world. It's a part of you. It's it's taking social media back to humanity, I suppose. And there's been this huge following of this app. You have to queue to get the codes to get on it and all that sort of stuff. But quite frankly, is it going to do anything for you? Probably not, unless you're sort of in that sort of groovy New York scene. Some of you might be in there, but what really do you need to be in? So you need to think about the demographics of what you're doing and who is where. Are your people on Facebook? Are your tribe on Twitter? Are they on both? Is Instagram helpful because you can post to Instagram and then post to both Facebook and Twitter from there? To be really effective, you need to determine where your media message is, or your social media is best suited. Is it an image-orientated site like Instagram, or a text-based site like Twitter or Facebook, or a video sharing social media service like Vine or Beam, or some of the others that are around? Once you've posted your photo or your video, you can choose to also share it on other sites, but by primarily focusing on the social media site that best fits your need, I think people will be more likely to respond. So let's take it up a notch. What's the key tasks of a social media manager? And some of you, be interesting to know if if there are any of you who are dedicated, either full or largely part-time social media managers out there, how if there is anyone, there's a lot of organisations that have them, and how you spend your day. A lot of people spend their day in lots of different ways. So first of all, you need to think about content, and that incorporates a whole bunch of stuff: curating, crafting, posting, and scheduling content. We'll have a think about some of the tools in a moment. Management of social media: responding, listening, engaging, and helping. How you can grow your social media presence, and obviously the rationale for doing that: measuring, analysing, planning, and experimenting. Utilising your tools to drive efficiencies. Minimise distractions. So obviously don't bunk off. It's really easy to bunk off doing social media. We all know that, but try not to. And spend some thinking time as well. Just excuse me, I'm just going to just go offline for a second. I'm just going to have a coughing fit. Just a sec. My apologies. I'm back on deck. So hang on a second. Sorry. And thinking time. As I mentioned before, what's the last time that you can think of that you actually sat there and spent some quality time doing something other than just moving from task to task? The guy that I referenced before, the Basecamp CEO, the TED Talk he did, he describes our working day as a series of working moments. It's not really working. Certainly not thinking if you think about it. And, very often you move from one conversation to an email to a blog post to opening another email to going to get a cup of tea and back again. How often do you actually sit down and go, I'm going to do something for an hour and I'm not going to do anything else? And I sort of can remember that before the internet. Yes, we sat in offices and, we talked to the people next door to us, but we didn't have the distractions that social media create. And I think, try and create those times in your schedule, which is what we're trying to do by talking about this stuff today. But scheduling that thinking time and even that logging off time, going offline, I think is important. So how do you spend your time on social media? A typical day. A lot of people have lots of theories about this, but this is mine for the record. I think you can probably do it in under an hour. Some people can probably do it less than that. If you've really engaged, you might, and you've got a lot of followers and a lot of engagement, you may need a bit more. But I think you can probably spend 15 minutes or so on Twitter and Facebook, jumping in, responding, scheduling and sharing, spending 15 minutes on LinkedIn, promoting and managing your groups that you may be part of. I run a group, so I respond to those questions or requests to join. Sending emails. One of the things that is, I think, possibly a really underutilized resource. I mean, I have, when I first started this business, I think I had probably a couple hundred people that I connected with on LinkedIn. Probably now I would say I have about 6,000 roughly. And I went out right at the very beginning, obviously in an attempt to start networking, and I, hit the ground running and I tried to network, and that built up to sort of 400 or 500, 600, 700. And as you probably know, LinkedIn's quite viral. I had some guy who connected with me from some remote country somewhere over the last few days, and I'll just sort of hit the yes button without realizing. But this guy, I then blocked him yesterday off LinkedIn because he told me that he had $28 million that I could have access to if I sent him some banking details. So occasionally you'll get some crazies, but most of the time, most of the people that you connect with on LinkedIn are probably really useful to you on a whole range of ways. I mean, I have connections on LinkedIn with entrepreneurs, with social entrepreneurs, with not-for-profits, with corporates, with organisations, with fellow people in the media and communications world, with government. a whole lot of the interests that are sort of all swarming out there in my life. Some of those have got crossovers, some of them are separate. But, they're there, and I can tap into them in different ways. The other thing that you can do using an email is just genuinely, connect with someone you're not connected with. And yes, you have to pay for those. It's on a higher level of service, but they're actually quite useful if you're trying to make contact with someone for a particular reason. You've got a suggestion or a proposal for them. It often is a sort of neutral territory. I think some people take umbrage of receiving those sorts of messages through their email system, and some people, I think, in some ways see LinkedIn as neutral territory, and so I think it's useful in that sense. If you use Pinterest, Google, or Instagram, or some other networks, spend 15 minutes, promoting, interacting, and managing those. And, really, you should be able to manage your stuff in terms of proactively in an hour or less each day. Of course, I'm sure most of you, as I do, the first thing that you do, possibly before you even get out of bed or say hello to your partner or your dog or your young kids, is look at your phone, and it's possibly the last thing you do before you go to sleep is plug it in next to you, although everyone tells us that's terrible. It is occupying our time, but we're probably spending time bunking off, and I bunk off all the time. I have all sorts of interests that I pursue on social media. It's not just about work for me, and it's not just about work for all of you. I'm sure I'm interested in various food blogs, healthy food blogs. I'm interested in, journaling and all sorts of stuff, So, I'm sure some of you have got interest in all sorts of stuff, philately, stamp collecting, opera, whatever it is. But in terms of the work stuff, you should be able to get it done in an hour or less, I'm hoping. Someone's just asked me a question. What's your definition of engagement? Is one single response to a post considered engagement? Well, yes, it is in some respects, I think, Teresa, sorry. I think so. Yes, it's a diffused engagement. They're not going to be your best buddies, but you can probably look. I've got people who respond to my tweets who are based in the States or the UK or whatever, and I'm not quite sure how they find them. They must be following, keywords or whatever else. But and I'm not particularly worried about those people. But if they're people that are, engaged in my world and they've responded to me, then and again, you can be preoccupied with this stuff, and it can absorb every moment of your waking day. How will you get, John Smith back engaged again to talk to you again tomorrow because, he talked to me today. Obviously, we don't think like that, but responding to them so that, they're feeling engaged is a positive thing, and probably potentially they'll keep listening, or you'll keep talking to them in some other way, and that's sort of how you develop those connections, I think. So yes, it is a form of engagement. Let's have a think about the platforms and the tools, I think, which is, really helpful to get a handle on the sorts of ways we can use the technology that's out there to help us in our day-to-day management of this stuff. So let's have a think. Getting our ducks in a row. That was the most interesting photo I could find, which I thought was sort of fun. The dashboard tools. Now, be interested to know if any of you are using dashboard tools already, and by that I'm talking about Hootsuite and Buffer, or some of the others. There are, the Sprout Social. There's a few others out there. Probably the most economical is Hootsuite and Buffer. You have to pay for all of them, pretty much. There is a free Hootsuite thing, and you can have trials of these programs, but fundamentally, to make them work for you and to be able to upload multiple platforms, you then have to start paying for them. And for us, for example, we have we pay for a Buffer service that can have 15 platforms on it. I think between myself and 50 Acres, there's probably about 8 or 9 platforms we use, which is personal Twitter, the company Twitter, Facebook, personal and company, LinkedIn, a LinkedIn group, a couple of LinkedIn groups that I'm a member of that we can post to, Pinterest up there, so there's a whole bunch of platforms. But I also use it to attach client project feeds so that we can then use it to put feeds out or to put posts out on their behalf. So, it's really useful. You can have ones that will allow you to put, unlimited platforms, so you could literally use them for hundreds of different people if you've got lots of projects on the go. So, it seems to me that none of you are using these. Could you let me know if any of you are using any of these sorts of platforms, Hootsuite and Buffer? Just just say yes or something in the questions. They're really useful, and if you're not using them, obviously a lot of you aren't. If you're not, okay, someone's asking me, is it worth using Hootsuite? Someone's using Hootsuite. There's three of you. Someone asked, is it worth using Hootsuite, etc., if you're only starting with Facebook, or can you use Facebook to schedule posts? No, you can't really. You've got to schedule. You can schedule ads on Facebook, but you can't really schedule posts as such. So you really do need some sort of. There are some other cheaper tools. Hootsuite isn't that expensive, but if you're just using Facebook, you can't, I don't think. So, yeah, I think you probably do need to use one of the social media tools. But it seems to me that not many of you are using it, about 4 or 5, 6. Some of them are using, okay, there's a bit more, actually, there's about 10 of you. Someone's just saying I use Facebook to schedule posts. I've never done that, actually. So it'd be interesting, Georgia, if you could just tell me how you're doing that, and I might let people know through this discussion. You probably can do, but I just never have done it. I've always used a management platform. So these platforms allow you to use any of these different platforms and plug them in. And, it's obviously the benefit is to schedule them way ahead. You can schedule them, weeks, months out, which is really helpful. You can strategically time items that will, come out when you're putting out a media release, or when you know that there might be an issue happening, if it's something that's a public issue or whatever it is, the launch of something that you're doing, or a campaign or a promotion that you're doing. So hang on a minute. I hope Georgia. David says he signed up for Hootsuite. David also uses Facebook to schedule. If one of you just could put a little message to me about where that is in the site, and I can point that to people. It's just something that I've never done. I've always used Hootsuite, and now I'm on Buffer, and I did use Sprout Social for a while, but it is expensive. You can also choose to set up posts on a regular basis. So if you just, I wouldn't recommend, putting it out at, 10:15 every morning, because people will go, oh, it's 10:15, we're going to get a tweet from X or Y like clockwork. So you don't want that, but you can obviously have it scheduled so that you do 2 or 3 a day, which is I think helpful. Most people seem to be. Alison says Hootsuite's got great analytics and you can add listening channels. That's absolutely right. And David says a community bank, a charity, and a newsletter page I edit. Okay, I think he's using that Facebook for that, he says. So hopefully one of them might point that out to you, but obviously Facebook, you can schedule stuff in. So go and have an examination of that. And I will try and link to that when we send these slides out, if we haven't uncovered the truth before the end of this discussion. Okay, hang on. Lucy says, to schedule on Facebook, you click on the arrow beside the publish button and you can click on the schedule. Okay, there you go. Good on you. Georgia says, where the publish button is, there's a drop-down arrow where you use that. Yeah, that's the same thing. So, okay, near the publish button, everyone, which is fantastic. So thanks, guys. So using the tools is really important. Obviously, if we don't use them, we're sitting there doing all of these posts one by one, which gets very boring and very time-consuming. There's a whole lot of content curation tools, I think, that you can use to help you gather ideas and prepare posts. Nuzzle, Dig Deeper, some of these are sort of American focused. Sway. LinkedIn Pulse is really good for sort of topical stuff, depending on what the space is that you're in. Panda and the Buffer blog. Buffer used to give you suggestions, constant suggestions that you could then post, but they're phasing that out. And so, but they do have a blog, which is really good. And, I would probably put that in my RSS feed, and we'll have a think about how that can be deployed in a sec. There's a whole lot of people, and Andrea and Lucy and Sarah, are giving us some hints on how to make the Facebook stuff. Sarah says, write the Facebook stuff work, write the post, save the draft, drop down arrow beside the publish button, set the schedule. Okay, that's cool. That's great. So if you're only on Facebook, yes, you can. Just use Facebook and schedule is the answer. And if you're not on multiple platforms, there's your answer. But if you're on Twitter and Facebook and you want to deploy the same posts to both sites, you will need to, use a social media management tool, which is what we find effective, because we can post to 10 people, 10 platforms at once, which you can't do through just one platform. Obviously, you can use streamlining tools to help save time and curate your content. So something like Pocket or if IFTTT, it should have another T in there, if IFTTT, if this, then that. So that tells you to do, if you do this action, then it triggers this action. It's a app which you can have set up on your phone or through your computer. So, and I'll explain in a second how that works. Pocket, again, is linked to Feedly or an RSS feeder. I don't know whether people are familiar with RSS feeders, but essentially what you do with an RSS feeder is gather all of the blog content that you watch, or content from all the various sort of sites that you are watching. Rather than watching them individually, you watch them through what's called an RSS feeder. Feedly is the one I use. I use the upgraded version. There's a free version, or there's various other RSS feeders that you can use. You then can use scheduling platforms we've talked about, like Buffer and Hootsuite. If you're just on Facebook, we've now identified that you can just use Facebook, which is fantastic. But I think Buffer and Facebook should be your best friend in many respects, particularly if you're on multiple platforms, which people tend to be. So how to use these tools, and we're almost at the end. So if anyone's got any questions, now we've solved the Facebook dilemma, which is great. I've got one question here. I'll get to that in a second, Andrea. But please drop that question in the thing, because we're just on the second last of the last slide. So Andrea asks, is it ideal to push the same post out to each social media channel or customize it for each one? Well, that then goes to, I suppose, the time factor. If you're trying to be constrained with your time and recognize that this stuff takes a lot of time, then what I do is I essentially will post most of the time the same post out to different channels, because if you think about what you do, you don't sit there with Twitter and Facebook open at the same time, monitoring them simultaneously and go, oh, haha, John's done it again. He's put the same thing on Twitter and Facebook. And yes, people do that, and I do that, and a lot of people do that. And I think it is a really time-effective way, because, you might be following someone on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and a whole bunch of places, but quite honestly, you're only really watching one of them at any time. And so your audience, probably about 80 or 90% of your audience, never sees what you write at any moment. There's a very small portion of them who are seeing actually what you do. And so, there's a lot of theory that, you've got to actually repost this stuff, in different ways, multiple times, to actually even get the pickup across your audience. So I think there's nothing wrong with it. But there sometimes will be things like, for example, if you are a creative organization that does really amazing stuff, Instagram would probably work really well for you, and Pinterest would work really well for you. Twitter will work, but you probably need to have a few more words, and for Facebook, a few more words again. So you may need to craft some different sorts of posts. But if you are an information, or someone who's putting out stuff about a campaign or an idea or a product, then you can probably put out the same sort of 140 word tweet or letter tweet across all your mediums. I always try and have a link in, not always, if it's a tip, I don't, but for a lot of posts we'll have a link and or a picture, because as we know, Twitter is now working like a mini Facebook in many respects. So I think it's important to use use pictures whenever you can. So how do you use the tools? Well, you use Feedly to gather that content. You're tapping into a range of the most appropriate sites, ones that you're interested in. I mean, I follow all sorts of people on my Feedly site, a lot of food blogs. Most of them are from the US. I go through different obsessions. Sometimes it's baking, sometimes it's clean eating, sometimes it's paleo. Depends on the week and my proclivities. A lot of the content that I've got on there, I'm also following the content that I'm interested in and can use for reposting. So, you can have all sorts of things on your Feedly site, and you can go into that segment on your Feedly app. You don't have to be looking at everything all the time. So you don't have to sit there and pore over everything that you're interested in every time you go on a Feedly. You can specifically go in and see in the area. It's like a library, effectively. If you don't know how it works, go and have a look at it, check it out, download it onto your phone and start using it, because I think it's a really good tool. You can set up Pocket to connect with that, and there's a few people have posted a few questions, and I'll get to them just in a second. Set up Pocket, which has an automatic integration facility with Feedly, to add the articles that you like to your content list with a one-click button. Have a look at that on Feedly. It works really well. Then you set up the If This Then That app. Again, if people haven't seen that, I've heard my brother-in-law, who's this sort of doctor who's also an engineer, sort of genius, he uses If This Then That to turn on his lights at home before he gets home. I don't know how he does it, but he does. It's an amazing app which will tell your system to do things if one thing happens. So you can sort of trigger stuff off in all sorts of ways. Have a look at If This Then That. You can get really obsessed with it, and it can take up a lot of time for you, but it also can be quite simple, and you can actually have it quite simply set up. So, for example, here, when you favourite something, an article in Pocket, it's automatically then sent to your buffer queue. Not everything is sent to the buffer queue, but the ones that you favorited, not the ones that you've just sent to Pocket, but the ones that you've actually specifically directed. Then you use other methods to collect the stories, all the inspiration, all the pictures, all the infographics, anything that you can either repost or might provide you with the inspiration for new content. Obviously, you might be getting those from a range of different ways, and it's not just that you're getting everything from Feedly. People will always sit and browse on the internet. It's the nature of the beast, and so there's nothing wrong with, you don't have to sit there and restrict yourself to Feedly. But these are just methods and ways of conjuring it and having the flow set up so that it's working a bit more effectively for you. Then you need to filter through that curated content and get rid of the stuff that's not going to be useful for you or your audiences. There's an enormous amount of stuff we're getting, and you're not going to repost it all, and you're not going to use it all. And I think one of the things that, I don't know about everyone else, but you often get a lot of bump sent through to you, cleaning up your inbox from time to time. I sign up for a lot of stuff, from time to time, and then occasionally go through and get rid of it all, or a lot of it. So, having a think about what you're actually looking at, I think is a good thing too. Now, I'm just responding to a couple of questions here. Andrea asks me, bear with me, how often do you suggest we post? It really depends on what you're doing. For us, we probably post 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes more. And that's the same post or very similar post across all mediums, probably the same post largely. If you're an individual and you're just doing it for yourself, you need to post when there's something to say, or you might just want to comment on something. It depends on what you're doing it for. If you're just literally making a comment, I mean, some people will post 50 times a day, 120 times a day. But you've got to be really careful that, you don't exhaust the people that are looking at what you're doing, and they're thinking, they begin to think you're a bit of a lunatic. So I'm not saying that you would be, obviously, Amanda, but you've just got, it's that fine line between contributing something. If you're think of it like a dinner party. If you're sitting at a table in a dinner party and you just keep talking, someone talks and then you talk, and then someone else talks and then you talk. Then eventually people will get tired listening to you. So, it really depends on what you're going to add and to where. And it might just be you just want to pitch in and say something about a current issue. It may just be that you want to pitch in and say something about a hashtag. You might just join in the late line discussion. So that you might have a bunch of stuff to say at various times, and then you might not say something for a day or two. But I do think it's important to be posting probably at least 2 or 3 times a week. I think, once a week as an organisation is pretty poor, depending on how big your follower base is. And, a lot of organisations will help to establish their Twitter and Facebook and whatever social media platforms and assets. And, lo and behold, a week or two later, they go, well, we've only got 6 people following us. And they're not, it takes time. We all know that, to build those people up. Sometimes it will take an acquisition campaign to actually generate that sort of interest. So you need to have a think about a different variety of ways of using all the tools that are available to you. David asks, is a reposted item, what about copyright? It might be worth mentioning it. Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is, look, I'm sure I'm a trained lawyer, but not a practicing one. I've never practiced as a lawyer, but I do have a law degree, and I did study copyright, but I do not profess to be up on the latest copyright law. I think that probably most content out there is subject to what's called fair use, and if it's in the public arena and you make a comment on it, then it's probably fair use. I think if you are providing that you're linking to it, or that you're crediting it, or that you're using it for inspiration, I think it's fine. But if you are, quoting Gandhi, and it's you're pretending that it's you that's speaking, that's another matter. That's obviously someone will uncover that. But if you're using something for inspiration and you're drawing on it to make some conclusions, like you do in an essay at university or whatever it is, and I think that's a different matter. But I think if you link to things, if you credit things, if you're reposting, rebadging, I think that's probably what I would probably say constitutes fair use. David also asks, yes, he says it's just something people need to be mindful of. Yes, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There is also the issue of photographs, and my husband is a photographer, Andrew Mears, on the Sydney Morning Herald. Some of you may know him. He was the, if any of you saw The Insiders on the weekend, he was the one that was in the Brandis glasses with Michael Bowers and the funny jumper. He is always, lecturing me about copyright, and I use photos that I get and download from a photo website. I pay to access them, so the copyright payments are built into the system. When I download those files, I pay to use those photos. So he gets very aggrieved about people reposting photographs of his that don't credit him. He doesn't mind if people credit him, but what he really finds annoying is when News Limited, for example, reposts a photo, or another website like Mamma Mia or someone else reposts a photograph without crediting him or someone, photographer, and that's absolutely fair enough. So I think you're right, David, it's probably more, people are feeling more passionate, I think, about creative assets perhaps as well, that rather than ones that are necessarily written. Georgia says she has 1,300 followers on Facebook and have found one post per day works. you tried 2 posts and you weren't getting as much engagement, and that's absolutely fair enough. It depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, Georgia. I'm assuming that you're probably a professional with some sort of, you're doing something that you're trying to talk about. I'm assuming that you're probably also using maybe some other sites. But yes, use what you can and fall into the pattern that works for you. I think the main thing is don't let it exhaust you, and don't be a slave to it. And I suppose that's where I'm coming from today, which is to give people some tools to think, we can control this technology, hopefully to a positive end, rather than letting it control us. And move away from your computer, turn it around, turn it off, put down the screen, do whatever you want, get out a pen, turn off the email, do some writing, walk out of the office with a notepad, go into another room with some real people and have a think about what it is you're trying to do, rather than just sitting there going, I have to do my email. I have to do my email. Because at the end of the day, you will probably look around and going, oh, okay, I went through 73 emails and responded to them all, but have I done anything else? And yeah, I did some social media posting, but what else have I done? So social media, I think, is a useful tool for us all in terms of where it comes into our working day, but we also need to have the thinking time that surrounds it to augment it. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have already asked questions, and thanks so much to everyone who gave us the way forward with the Facebook scheduling, which is just brilliant. I have learned something today. I wasn't sure about that, and that was great. So thank you very much for attending the 50 Acres Academy webinar today. It's been lovely having you all. We're having another one in a month's time on 11 a.m. on Tuesday, September the 22nd, about influencer and blogger marketing. Some of you may have heard of influencer marketing and blogging. Marketing, a lot of people are, it's I suppose an extension of PR without being so overt. It's trying to get, literally, I suppose it's an extension of getting the influencers that you're trying to connect with. How do they start marketing and promoting and proselytizing on your behalf? There's a sort of different set of rules for, not-for-profits and for companies and for products, but we'll examine all of those and how we might be able to tap into some of those influencer and blogger markets. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a lovely day, and I hope you have a great week, and look forward to talking to you again on another Academy webinar. Thanks a lot.